It was in 1954, and it took me by surprise, actually. I had been practicing yoga for many years previous to this, but on this Saturday morning in May 1954, I was in my apartment and I heard a voice. It was in English. The voice was not in the head. This was no psychic apparition. The voice was outside of myself, and it said, "Prepare yourself, you are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament."
On May 8th, 1954, a London taxicab driver named George King experienced what he believed to be direct contact from aliens in the form of an auditory verbal message. The voice commanded, "Prepare yourself. You are to become the voice of interplanetary parliament." Shortly after, King began to receive transmissions from extraterrestrial, interdimensional beings from Mars, Venus, and across the galaxy. These transmissions occurred when King entered a state of deep meditative trance called samadhi. During these transmissions, a being known as Aetherius utilized King's voice box to spread his message to mankind, urging humans to align themselves with the path towards enlightenment, towards spiritual evolution. And so a London taxicab driver founded one of the earliest UFO religions in the West, the Aetherius Society. But unlike Scientology, with its rampant abuses, violent techniques, and unabashed grift, or unlike Heaven's Gate with its mass suicide and accusations of brainwashing, or unlike Realism with its accusations of Nazism and frequent attention from anti-cult groups, the Aetherius Society has something a little bit different. There's a twist here I didn't see coming when I started researching this episode for the show. Speaking of the show, this is Culture Just Weird. I'm Kayla. I'm a television writer.
I'm Chris. I'm a data scientist and game designer.
Thank you for joining us for our last episode of Season 4. This has been the kinder, gentler, self-carrier season, I think.
Like aircraft carrier?
Yes, aircraft carrier season.
Okay.
More self-care-y. I think you and I both needed that, and I hope that we brought some coziness and relief to our listeners too, not just us. How are you, Chris?
I'm not as cozy right now because I have COVID.
Yes.
I'm cozy.
Speaking of self-care.
Where this is the first time we've actually recorded in 2 different rooms, so that's fun.
Yeah, I don't want to get COVID from you, not again. Not that you gave me COVID.
I'm fine, everyone. Don't worry about me. But if I sound a little nasally, that is why. That
is the COVID.
That's the Rona talking.
Yes, go ahead.
I do have a question though. Like, do I vote for this parliament? Is it like a House of Commons or House of Lords situation?
You know what? I don't know. I don't think that the Interplanetary Council is democratic. I think it is more something that you evolve into. We will get into kind of the path towards something like that in this belief system, but I don't think it's voted upon. I think it is more a title that you evolve into.
I see. Okay, I didn't mean to get ahead of you or anything.
No.
I was just wondering how the workings of the government work.
It's a good question. It's a solid question. Before we dive too deep into today's topic, the Aetherius Society, I just want to just connect with our listeners. Like, if you're listening, thank you. This has been a fantastic season. If you are a listener who would like to support the show, you can find us on Patreon at patreon.com/culturejustweird, where we have things like outtakes, we have bonus episodes, we have polls, we have different things like that. Just a little side note for our current patrons, we are behind on our bonus episodes, and that's something that we're actually going to be catching up on during our hiatus after the season wraps, so keep an eye out for that. And we actually have new patrons this time around, so we have some new people to shout out.
Yeah, even more.
I know.
Last time we had new patrons, This time we have new patrons. It's great.
I know, people are amazing. So a big thank you to Liz T, to Dom, and to Ragna Hader, Eric's daughter. Thank you for supporting the show.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Like, it's even more than just like, it's not as much about the money as it is about like people think that we're actually like something valuable to listen to. It just makes us feel really good. So we love you guys, and we love our listeners too. If you feel like supporting us, Patreon/cultists&gt.
Now let's get back to the Aetherius Society.
I can't wait.
You and I, just for full disclosure for our audience, you and I have already talked about this. This is not a topic that I'm springing on you. I have shared a little bit of the info about this with you, and maybe more. We will get to that. But
I have a level of awareness, but there's
Yes.
a bunch of details that I am not certain of.
We are getting into those details right now. These are things you don't know, and I would bet a lot of money things that our listeners also don't know.
How much money?
A lot
Like
of money.
$75?
All of the money we make on our Patreon. So all $0. George King grew up in Shropshire, England, with a family deeply steeped in the occult. His parents, particularly his mother, had a great interest in theosophy, which is a spiritual belief system that is kind of one of the origin points for modern day New Age beliefs. So it's kind of like theosophy, New Thought, those kinds of things were all kind of going on at the same time. Like theosophy was founded in the late 1800s, and it married existing concepts together. So taking things like philosophy, I think specifically like Platonic ideas, and married those with Hinduism and Buddhist beliefs. And it is important to note that theosophy is a very white Western invention. I believe the woman who's kind of like the mother of theosophy, Madame Blavatsky, I think she was a Russian immigrant. So there are some elements of appropriation here. It is a very good name. The general overview of theosophy might remind you of a lot of groups we've talked about on the show, or like this is stuff that comes up again and again and again in like cult-aware circles. So theosophy.
I've heard the like the marriage of like what white people perceive as Eastern stuff with like other aspects of like Western philosophy. We've definitely seen that before.
We talked about that with tulpas. We talked about that with SRF. We talked about that just time immemorial. So just to get a little bit deeper into what exactly theosophy is. So general overview is the belief is that there is an ancient order of spiritual masters who have attained enlightenment and deep spiritual wisdom, who are now working to share those teachings through a living person. The purpose is to help the world reach enlightenment by relearning this ancient, powerful knowledge. These spiritual masters are known to us as figures like Jesus, Buddha, Confucius, and others, and humans go through reincarnation until enlightenment is achieved. Various tools, techniques, and tropes are shared to reach that enlightenment. So think of things like yoga, meditation, various supernatural practices.
This is already sounding very similar to SRF, because SRF had Jesus was part of their pantheon, but then like yoga masters were too. So like it already sounds a little bit like that, where like you bring, and also they were like very much into saying like, oh yeah, all these religions are really good, like Hinduism, Buddhism, Christianity. I think they had Islam and Judaism in there too, I want to say.
I think in Jainism,
Jainism maybe, yeah. So they were very much like, yeah, come one, come all.
There's a lot of similarities in some of these, in some of the stuff from Self-Realization Fellowship and the Aetherius Society, but I feel like it's less that there's similarities between these two individual groups, and more a lot of groups have grown out of things like theosophy. A lot of groups have grown out of kind of, and theosophy is not the only thing, but it definitely is an origin point for this belief that like all the religions are true religions because they all just are kind of worshiping the same thing, and all of these like religious figures, like they're all part of our thing. Like we're kind of the umbrella.
So theosophy, you could kind of think of it as like kind of the trunk of some of these branches, like SRF and Aetherius and a bunch of these others are like branches, but like if you trace back to the trunk, it's theosophy. Yeah,
I'm sure that like Ramtha's in there. I'm sure that like there's bits of Tartaria, like anything that is considered like New Age probably draws from theosophy. And I don't know enough about theosophy to say like, oh, this is the be all and end all. Like this is absolutely like patient zero. I don't know if Madame Blavatsky was, kind of biting off somebody else's already existing ideas, even more so than she already was. But I don't know if this is truly like, this is the first time anyone married like Western esotericism with Eastern religion, or if it's just kind of like, here is an origin point we can look at.
Yeah, probably not. I mean, right? At least, but it certainly seems to be highly influential. That doesn't necessarily mean it was the first.
Right. And this episode's not about theosophy. There's a lot more we can go into on this. But just keep in mind some of these tropes as we talk more in detail about the Aetherius Society. So George King was raised in a family that followed theosophy. So that means from a young age, he was into things like spiritual healing, mysticism, the metaphysical, yoga, psychic powers, and that like specific blend of Western esotericism, New Age beliefs, and Eastern religion that we've been talking about. His mother had claims of direct contact with extraterrestrials, including riding in flying saucers with Martians and Venusians, one of whom she recognized as Jesus.
Wait, so Jesus was driving the flying saucer?
Jesus was in the flying saucer with the Martians and the Venusians.
Okay, he wasn't necessarily driving. Was he like Captain Picard, or was he like
he was sitting in the chair, and Jonathan Frakes was there, and Worf was there. Okay,
and he stepped over the chair weirdly and said...
If you've seen Star Trek, you understand the Aetherius Society, which actually you kind of do. When George King was 25, he got very serious about his yoga practice. And eventually he claimed to have mastered several forms of yoga, most notably Kundalini yoga. And so when we're talking about yoga here, it's kind of like, think again about Self-Realization Fellowship, where we're not necessarily...
Weren't they Kundalini?
They might have been Kundalini. We'll get to that. Hold on. We'll get to that. There's a lot to cover here. We're not talking about like when you go to the gym and you take like a hatha yoga class or like a power yoga class where you're doing like, down dog and pigeon and these different like very physical poses. Like this is the yoga that's in SRF where it was like more internal work.
Like more meditative and more spiritual.
So Kundalini yoga is a practice that helps one manipulate their Kundalini energy, which Kundalini is a concept in Hinduism. So it's this divine energy located at the base of the spine. And in New Age beliefs, Kundalini energy takes like immense practice and concentration and wisdom to be able to draw it up along the various chakras along the spine. So the idea is you want to take this energy and bring it up through your various chakras, and that gives you like higher levels of meditative enlightenment. So
okay, and chakras are just what, like positions within?
They're like different
body?
Different positions kind of along the spine, going from the base of the spine all the way to the top of the head, and just kind of think of each one as like a spiritual power center. And
right.
again,
and they all sort of have like a theme, right? Like base, and
I don't know too much about that, and like most of my understanding of chakras are going to be coming from this like very New Age Western like appropriative place. I don't know.
Right. Yeah, me
what
too.
Their actual
mine mostly.
Is.
Yeah, mine mostly come from like watching Reiki videos or listening to Reiki videos as I go to sleep in YouTube. So I probably don't have a clear picture either.
Yeah, so I think just thinking of them as like spiritual centers along the spine that each correspond to different things. So there's like a throat chakra and a third eye chakra and a crown chakra and a solar plexus chakra, and they all kind of have different purposes. You might remember us talking about SRF, like that was their whole thing, was that they had a proprietary practice that dealt with bringing the electric current energy of Kundalini up and down the spine. So yes, it was, again, there's overlap here. George King became very practiced in this drawing up of the Kundalini energy. And while for some, doing this might take, minutes or many minutes or hours of intense focus, he actually cultivated the ability to do the same in seconds. So like he could bring the Kundalini energy up into his throat in like 30 seconds, throat chakra. And this...
How do you measure something like that? Do you have a stopwatch?
He said it takes me about 30 seconds. I mean, I don't know if you need to time it. You just know, it's 30, it's down there. Oh, it's up here now. And for him, it was like the manipulation of the Kundalini in this way allowed him to enter into the state of samadhi, which again, we talked about with SRF, because Paramahansa Yogananda was also able to achieve this state. And this is basically a very pure, intense meditative state, like reaching universal consciousness kind of thing.
Sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, I would like to be able to do it. I cannot move my Kundalini to save my life. It was this ability that allowed George King to be able to like tap into the secrets of the spiritual world and eventually become the vessel of transmission for interplanetary parliament or spiritual masters looking to share their knowledge with the people of Earth. So, 10 years after his foray into yoga, he hears a voice in his London apartment commanding him to become the vessel for these masters, particularly a cosmic master from Venus named Aetherius.
Oh, okay. So Aetherius was a guy.
Aetherius was a guy. Aetherius is a cosmic master. George King was kind of like, I don't know what this means, but he didn't really have to like wait long for instructions, because he says that a week later, a legendary yogi who he doesn't name, but he was like, oh, I automatically recognized this guy. He's very famous. He walked into his locked apartment and sat down and said, basically, you need to heed this message. You need to develop your yogic and meditative powers even further, and then you need to share these teachings that are being transmitted to you with the world. And so kind of from this marriage of the message from Aetherius, this yogi coming in saying, hey, get your ass up and work.
Was this like a Jacob Marley thing where he was like a ghost that came in and was like, hey man, do this thing?
No,
or was
he's
this like a living yogi that just like broke into his house?
He's very clear that this man was alive at the time and was physically present. Like he even says, when George King describes this, he says like he sat down across from me, the chair creaked under his weight, like he was physically there.
So it was a break-in.
I don't know if it was so much a break-in as it was like a spiritual moment, because like the door was locked and he just like opened it. A spiritual break-in. Either way, the Aetherius Society was born from this. So just a short time later, in I think around 1956, George King rented a space, like he rented a meeting space in town, and he began formally channeling cosmic masters, including Aetherius, as well as a Martian named Mars Sector 6, which is the coolest name.
That's an extremely cool name.
It's the coolest name. He also channeled Jesus Christ, who was revealed to be...
I've heard of him.
He, not in this way, because the Jesus Christ we know is like, oh, Son of God, came through Mary, Bethlehem. No, Jesus Christ is actually a cosmic master who is from Venus. And I know I sound a little flippant when I'm talking about this. I don't mean to. These are definitely beliefs that are out there, out of the realm of norm, but I am not intending to belittle or mock the beliefs of this actual group of people. It's just very different than what we're used to.
It's very different, and coming at it from a more normie perspective means it's going to be hard to like just swallow it whole hog right off the bat.
Yes. In addition to Jesus Christ being from Venus, he also channeled Buddha, who is also from Venus, and there were others in the mix. These channelings or transmissions were public events, and through these events, George King began to develop a following across England and the United States. He even appeared on television, most notably in 1959, to share his message and demonstrate his ability to channel and speak as Aetherius.
Oh shit, he went on TV?
He went on TV and he did a whole it was some BBC show where it was like, hello, we are BBC and we have some psychiatrists here who are going to talk to this guy who says he can talk to aliens, and then we're going to talk about it. And
Jesus and Buddha must have really good sunscreen or something. Well, actually, no, it's not hot on Venus because of the sun. It's hot because of the global warming.
Well, we'll get to that.
Oh, okay. They have ways to kind of combat. They have really good umbrellas.
We'll get to that. So over the course of his spiritual career, George King made over 600 audio recordings of the various teachings.
Holy moly.
The cosmic masters wanted to share with humans. And those audio recordings have become the basis of the theology of the Aetherius Society. These recordings were also developed into a number of books written by King and his disciples. And at a time when UFOs and aliens kind of had the public troubled and concerned, like we were kind of afraid of UFOs in the 50s.
We were?
Yeah. Well, it's like, think about it was a time of War of the Worlds and Mars attacks and like body snatchers and like scary space. Like we're afraid of nuclear disaster, so we're afraid of aliens.
I heard that the War of the Worlds thing is like a little overblown.
Of course it's overblown.
Like there were some people that like tuned in and thought it was real, but for the most part there wasn't like a
mass
big
hysteria.
panic where like everybody thought that we were getting invaded by aliens.
That makes sense. But this was a different kind of alien being presented, where it was more comforting and like the offering of answers rather than like, oh no, we're being invaded. And his mother even confirmed George King's legitimacy during one of her flying saucer rides with aliens, as the aliens spoke to her and backed up his claims and said, yes, we are using your son as a way to transmit our messages.
So his mom rode in the flying saucers.
Yeah, and said, hey, is this the real deal? And they went, yes.
I mean, isn't being in the flying saucer enough to tell you it's the real deal?
Not that aliens were the real deal, that George King was getting messages from them that he was sharing, that they were supposed to be like, oh, this is like spiritual teachings you need to share with the world that are being told to you from aliens. By the way, like all of your spiritual figures are aliens.
And maybe for someone like Mrs. King riding around in a flying saucer is like old hat. Maybe it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, that's not the big deal. The big deal is that her son is the chosen one.
Right, okay.
In addition to his spiritual adeptness, George King also amassed a number of titles and honors throughout his life. The Aetherius Society refers to him as, quote, an author, inventor, metaphysician, occultist prophet, psychic, spiritual healer, spiritual leader, teacher, yogi, and Aquarian master, end quote.
Damn, that's a lot of merit badges.
He was knighted with the title Knighthood in the Sovereign Military Orthodox Dynastic Imperial Constantinian Order of St. George from the Byzantine Royal House in Exile, which gave him the title of Sir, even though that's like this was not recognized by England's College of Arms. So like England's College of Arms, which says like, yes, this knighthood is allowed or that knighthood's not allowed, they didn't recognize his knighthood. The Aetherius Society... Did they
hear the name, though?
I think that they did, and I think that they went, that's a lot of names, and British people usually like that, but it's not British names, so we don't like it.
Okay, all right.
That's my impression of British people, especially British royalty.
Except for British listeners, you guys are all cool.
We don't like it. They have a lot of vocal fry.
Yeah, of course, yeah, in Britain they have a lot of vocal fry, yeah. Classic Britain.
The Aetherius Society refers to him as Dr. George King, though it's not entirely clear where his doctorate is from and what's it in. We'll kind of get into that a little bit later. He was consecrated as Metropolitan Archbishop of the Aetherius Churches by the Liberal Catholic Church, which actually, even though it doesn't sound like it, that's actually a theosophy organization, not like a Catholic organization. Catholics aren't going that's Catholics.
Catholics are pretty fucking occult as it is, though. I mean, that's not
they're
surprising.
pretty. The society also refers to George King as His Eminence, and there have been claims he has a PhD, THD, and DD. I don't know what any of those things are except for the PH. It has also been claimed that he was a police chaplain, so quite the accomplished gentleman, in addition to receiving and sharing knowledge from the Cosmic Masters.
Yeah, that's a lot.
I will also say here that most of the information we have on George King comes from the group itself. So this hagiography is kept and disseminated by the Aetherius Society. And that makes a lot of it kind of difficult to cross-check with other sources. And again, we'll save the debunking for later, so you can expect that. George King died in 1997, but the Society has continued on according to his teachings and progressing them. The Society now believes King to be an avatar and cosmic master, and that he is the only person in the Society to receive transmissions from other extraterrestrial masters. At this point, you might be wondering about the content shared in those 600 transmission sessions and various books and teachings from Dr. George King and the Aetherius Society.
Yeah, I hope they teach us like warp drive and stuff, right?
Not that I know of, but there is so much material here that maybe they do, and I didn't see it. I don't know.
I guess you don't really need warp drive if you're just going between like Mars and Venus.
Given the amount of like content present in the theology of this group, like, it's just not possible for us to be comprehensive or exhaustive in this episode, because it's like that would be like, okay, let's try and share every single thing that is in the Bible. Like, we can't cover the entire Bible or Quran in one sitting. We can't cover the entire theology of the Aetherius Society in one sitting. So we're going to do our best with an overview. To begin, cosmic masters are spiritually advanced beings from other planets and dimensions, sometimes referred to as the gods from space. They visit Earth in spacecraft, which we refer to as UFOs. Their goals with their visits are that they want to teach mankind the path to enlightenment. Cosmic masters occasionally come to Earth by being born into human bodies, known as cosmic avatars. So examples of this are Jesus, Buddha, Sri Krishna, Lao Tzu, Sri Patanjali, and many others.
King himself, right? You said they thought he was an avatar?
As far as I know, George King never claimed himself to be an avatar, but that is the belief of the group, like posthumously. Okay. That is the belief of the group now, is that he is an avatar.
Gotcha.
These cosmic masters form the Interplanetary Council, or cosmic hierarchy, which is seated in Saturn, and that's where Krishna's from. So again, like, I don't think it's a democratic process. I think just if you're a cosmic master, you're kind of on this council.
So okay, so it's not just Mars and Venus, it's also Saturn.
Correct.
How does it, like, is it like one of Saturn's moons, or does he have like a floating city or floating, because like Saturn's a gas giant?
Saturn.
Just from Saturn.
He's from Saturn. It's in Saturn.
Unsure.
Other cosmic masters, like we mentioned, are from Mars, Venus, other planets in the galaxy, other galaxies in the universe. There is also a spiritual hierarchy of Earth in which ascended masters serve. So stay with me. Ascended masters are different than cosmic masters. Ascended masters, they serve on Earth in order to help usher others into spiritual enlightenment. So like the cosmic masters are out in space. Ascended masters are people who achieve enlightenment on Earth and then are here to help others achieve that enlightenment. Because important religious figures from all over the world and from all different faiths are members of these hierarchies, the group essentially says that like all major world religions come from the same source and teach the same thing. So everything goes back to the same God or source, like we were talking about before.
Mm-hmm. It sounds very theosophian.
Theosophical?
Esophagus?
Esophagus. This part is very cool. I like it a lot. Each human's destiny is to become a cosmic master.
Sick.
Essentially, all of us are on an extremely long journey towards this highest level of enlightenment, and we will live many, many reincarnated lives in order to get there.
I like that too.
It just feels like, I know that I don't know. I'm sure that there's badness in it, but I also just really like the idea of like, yeah, we're all going to just be like totally like dope cosmic beings one day.
Yeah, it's cool that we're all on that track. Like,
right.
It's, it's pretty optimistic. Like, even if there's bumps in the road or whatever, I'm on my way there eventually.
You'll get there one day. Because of this lengthy process of reincarnation, and because they have ascended so many times, the cosmic masters are very old, very wise, and basically immortal.
Oh, never mind. I can't do that. I'm not that wise.
If you live enough lives, you'll be wise.
I am old though. I'll get
there.
The
reason why our space program has never found evidence of life on other planets in our galaxy, and the reason why cosmic masters can live on planets we know to be uninhabitable, like Saturn and Venus and Mars and all the rest, is that these entities exist on a higher spiritual level than the one that we're on. So they are able to maintain like a higher vibratory rate, which they can lower and raise at will. And that allows them to like live on these planets, but like they're not living on them in the same physical plane that, if you and I tried to go live on Saturn, we couldn't do it because our vibrations are off. But these cosmic masters can live on Venus because of the like higher vibratory rate that they have. They can live on a different plane on Venus.
But they still couldn't afford a house in Los Angeles, though.
Absolutely not. This like vibratory rate also explains why UFOs have been observed to kind of like blink in and out of sight. So like when people see UFOs, it's like, oh my God, all of a sudden there's a UFO there. And then all of a sudden it's gone. So that blinking in and out is the masters raising and lowering their vibratory rate. That's how, like, they're going in and out of our plane of existence. These enlightened aliens have been visiting humankind since the beginning and have been sharing their teachings throughout our history. So sightings such as the Star of Bethlehem, which is visible when Jesus was born on Earth, or the flying palaces and chariots known as Vimanas in Hindu and Sanskrit epics. These are actually both...
I had never heard of those.
I had not heard of those either. It's this idea of like, like flying palaces and chariots in the sky, and they're in Hindu belief.
A, that's cool, and B, I can see where if you were trying to like tie UFOs into that, and there's like stuff in the sky, I kind of get that.
Right. So Star of Bethlehem, these different things, these are all actually examples of UFOs. So there's kind of like a little bit of an Ancient Aliens thing going on here. But I don't think that they say things like, and they built the pyramids. I don't think that's necessarily part of Aetherius Society belief. I did not come across that, but so don't quote me.
I won't.
The Aetherius Society also believes that humans are not the only intelligent beings on an evolutionary path towards higher states of enlightenment.
Hold on, we're intelligent? Wait, what?
Yes. The sun, the earth, and the galaxy itself are living entities further along in their spiritual evolution. Humanity has veered off course in its path towards enlightenment and now requires the guidance from the cosmic masters to get to where we need to be.
So this is, I don't know if you talk about this later, but we had this discussion a little bit when we were discussing Aetherius a little while ago for this episode. But I mean, there is some, here, how do I put this? There's an actual scientific proposal. It's not necessarily like supported by any sort of, evidence or testing or anything, but there is a proposal called the Gaia hypothesis that the Earth's biosphere constitutes like a mega organism that like is alive in its own right. Sort of like how you and I are comprised of a bunch of cells. Maybe Earth's biosphere is actually like one organism comprised of all of the different animals and plants, yada, yada. That is actually a thing. And then I've also heard, there's different definitions for life out there, like what is living versus what is not living. Obviously, like what constitutes life and what doesn't constitute life gets to be like, pretty gray area when you talk about certain things like viruses and whatnot. So like there's some of the definitions of life that are really broad to encompass all of that stuff. One of them is that it is a localized decrease in entropy compared to its surroundings. So anytime you have a localized, so like for example, humans are organized in a certain way, or a single-celled organism is organized in a certain way, and if you compare the entropy of that thing to its surroundings, it's less. If you look at the galaxy as a whole, it actually does have, because of the way it's organized, it actually does have less entropy than like the surrounding space. So according to that definition, one could say maybe the galaxy is alive. So I'm not saying it's like, hey, like science says this is true, but I am saying that like there's some like not totally out there, kernels of truth maybe to like the Earth is alive or
right.
The galaxy is alive. Maybe.
Right. I think it's just, it kind of maybe sounds really foreign to hear like, oh, the Earth is actually on its own evolutionary path. The Earth is an advanced being that's, it's on its own evolution. The galaxy, like these kinds of claims feel very science fiction-y. It's good to remind us that like, well, maybe it's less science fiction than it sounds at first blush.
And if you take the broad definition of evolution, then that's just plain true, right? Like maybe it's not, biological, like evolution by natural selection, like, like you would normally think of when you say that word. But like these systems do evolve over time, whether they're sentient, whether they're alive or not. Like right. The universe does evolve from one state to another. The galaxy does have, an evolution of sorts where it goes from one state to another. Stars, there's different types of stars now than there were before, and there will be, different types of stars later on, and there'll be more of a certain type and less of a certain type. So things do evolve.
Maybe they're evolving towards the path to enlightenment. Who knows?
Enlightened stars.
Supposedly our humans' lack of spiritual evolution is actually holding the Earth back on her journey. Like she is continuing forward,
Oh, shit. Our bad Gaia.
Yeah, just more slowly than she should be. And it's kind of like up to us if we're going to decide if we're going to evolve alongside her. So we, according to their beliefs, we actually have the choice between enlightenment or self-destruction. And the Cosmic Masters triggered the creation of the Aetherius Society to help us choose the enlightenment over the destruction, which sounds kind of nice. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thanks, guys.
In addition to the Cosmic Masters and Ascended Masters, the Aetherius Society also reveres entities known as the Six Adepts. In society theology, an adept is somebody who can raise their kundalini energy up into the throat chakra, which, like we said, George King was able to do. But the Six Adepts are actually kind of a different concept. So just stay with me. 3 adepts were born as cosmic avatars on Earth into physical Earth bodies to help humankind sometime in the early 20th century. Their identities have not been revealed, but they worked together on a special mission along with Adepts 4 and 5, who were masters who existed on other planes of existence. So they were not physically on Earth. So there's the 3 guys who are physically on Earth and then like spiritual guys on a different plane working together. And all 5 of them worked with Lord Babaji, who is a great yogi that, again, you might remember as being one of the immortal spiritual teachers of Paramahansa Yogananda from Self-Realization Fellowship. So Lord Babaji was the 6th guy on this team. So then you have the 6 adepts, the three avatars on Earth, the 2
secret
spiritual guys, and then Lord Babaji.
Okay.
Got 6.
This is like Battlestar Galactica, where it's like, which ones are the Cylons?
Yeah. These adepts worked together by projecting into other planes of existence on Earth and other planets. And these planes are essentially where we end up after we die, but before we reincarnate. So we go to different planes after we pass, and then we're kind of there, and then we eventually reincarnate into different lives. So which plane we go to is determined by how far along in our spiritual evolution we are. And this sorting process just kind of happens based on that. It's not like a process of being, judged by an entity like in Christianity where you're like, oh, you're judged to go to hell, you're judged to go to heaven. It's more like, oh, I go to slot 6 because I'm on level 6 of the spiritual evolution path. Obviously, highly evolved intelligences go to the highest planes, and the least spiritually evolved, so like the quote unquote worst of us, will end up on the lowest planes. Yeah, podcasters. The society points out that this is where, quote, evil dictators and mass murderers go. So maybe we won't quite be there, but we'll definitely only be one step above.
Oh, so we'll be below. Oh, right, above. Sorry.
Even after death, some of these powerful negative entities are quite strong or become stronger, and they then attack Earth and humanity with evil spiritual energy. The 3 adepts took on missions known as the Alien Mission and Operation Carmelite to project to the lower planes and fight evil alien and terrestrial intelligences that were trying to destroy the Earth.
Yo, this got epic.
One of these entities was known as Satan, but they're very clear, like, look, this is not like a duality. This is not like a God versus Satan thing. Like, Satan is nowhere near as powerful as God because God is just like, God is everything. So he's just an entity. Both the Alien Mission and Operation Carmelite were successful, and according to the Society, quote, if they had not been, then life as we know it on Earth would not now exist.
Oh, shit.
So thank you to the 6 adepts.
Just dodged a bullet there.
According to the Society, quote, in addition to the 6 adepts, we also know of 3 other cosmic adepts active on the subtle planes, which are the different planes of existence. Adept Nixie's 0011 and team, also known as the Masters from Gotha, who invoke the energy used in Operation Sunbeam. And
is there going to be a quiz on this? Because I'm not, this is very complicated.
3 more known as Adept Nixie's 009 and team. End quote. So there's more adepts, and they have very cool names.
They do have cool names, which I will not remember.
There will also be a coming of the next master from space sometime in the future, so they kind of have a little bit of the Messiah is returning kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. You got to have a little bit of millenarianism in there. He
will arrive via UFO and basically do a reverse rapture. So if you are enlightened enough, you will stay on Earth. Actually, that's not a reverse rapture. Wait, how does it work? Do they think that Earth is going to be good and everyone gets to stay on Earth and then the bad people go to hell? Or do the rapture people think that we ascend to heaven and the bad people stay here and Earth turns to hell?
You know, I never read the Left Behind series, so I'm not super up on. I did actually try at one point. I tried reading the first Left Behind book because they were like super popular for a time.
Right.
And I was just like, all right, you know what? I'm just going to give it a shot. And I got like 2 pages in. It was just completely intolerable. Anyway, not to sidetrack on Left Behind. I think the way it works is that the most like holy, enlightened one with Jesus or whatever people get, they're the ones that get raptured up. They immediately go to heaven. And then like everybody else is just kind of like has to fight it out with all the, you know, Armageddon versus the Antichrist, yada, yada. And I think that at that point, like I'm not sure what happens then. I think like some of those people go to hell and some of them can like still earn their way into heaven somehow. That's where I get a little bit unclear on it.
Well, the rapture here is basically like if you're enlightened enough, you don't get raptured, you stay on Earth and you enjoy this like new utopian millennium. If you are not enlightened enough, you get raptured. You get taken away and you will be reborn on another planet, a different planet, and you will continue your own advancement towards enlightenment there.
I see.
Because of humankind's slow progress and spiritual evolution, we're actually open to attack from evil alien forces from across the universe. And the Cosmic Masters are frequently fighting with these invaders. Often,
is it like a spiritual battle or is it like with lasers?
It's spiritual. I don't actually know. I think it is more of a spiritual battle. I think that lasers probably would help, but I believe
Are there spiritual lasers?
It's a spiritual battle. I'm going to say yes to the spiritual lasers, but that's probably not canon.
Okay.
Often, environmental and societal issues on Earth, such as pollution, nuclear power, climate change, war, these are actually all symptoms of the much larger spiritual problem of humanity's arrested development. There is a lack of proper spiritual energy among humans, which puts us into a, quote, spiritual energy crisis. In order to help combat this crisis, George King invented devices to help spread or amplify the energy of the Aetherius Society. One of these inventions is known as the Spiritual Energy Battery. The specifics of its design are proprietary, so like not really known to the public, but the intent is that the Aetherius Society holds special gatherings called Operation Prayer Power, in which followers of the organization gather around the battery and spiritual leaders pray, chant mantras, and direct the spiritual energy from the room into the battery where it can be stored. So then when humanity is in times of crisis, they can then release the energy and spread it to the area in need.
Right. Or if you need to like plug in like a emergency power.
I don't think it's that kind
Keep
of battery.
the lights on. Oh, it's only spiritual energy.
No, it's just spiritual energy.
Okay.
And the Aetherius Society believes that Operation Prayer Power has helped prevent wars and natural disasters such as hurricanes, and has maybe even saved the world a time or two.
So shit, thanks guys.
Pretty cool. In addition to Operation Prayer Power, the Aetherius Society also has what's called spiritual pushes, and these happen these happen 4 times a year. So this is a month-long period in which a spacecraft known as Satellite Number 3 comes into Earth orbit. The spacecraft actually belongs to Mars Sector 6, who, remember, was one of the Cosmic Masters that King channeled and had the coolest name. While in orbit, Satellite Number 3 sends like special spiritual energy down to Earth. So it's like a time of like great spiritual power. Anyone can draw on this energy or help like create positive karma with it. This is supposed to be like a very opportune time to like help transform the world for the better. And according to the society, quote, the energy from Satellite Number 3 makes every selfless act of service 3,000 times more potent in terms of its karmic benefit to the world as a whole. 3,000.
Oh, so you definitely want to take advantage of that. Yeah.
Yes. And obviously, Satellite Number 3 is blocked from being viewed by telescopes or radar.
Yeah, of course.
The group also has a number of mountains that they've deemed sacred and have imbued with spiritual energy, and these mountains are sites of pilgrimage as well. I think there's like 19 across the world. I know that Mount Baldy is one of them in Los Angeles, and there's frequent pilgrimages there.
Wait, Mount Baldy, is that the one that's like right next to Mount Wilson?
It's right next to Mount Wilson, which has an old telescope on it that cannot see Satellite Number 3. So in addition to these mountain pilgrimages to Operation Prayer Power and the spiritual pushes, the group also has twice weekly church services. The first one being the 12 Blessings services and power circles. So the 12 blessings are what the title says. They're 12 blessings. They were transmitted to George King by Jesus in 1958. And each blessing consists of a dedication. So like to the Mother Earth, to the to those things, to each to different things.
All the cool stuff.
And then a prayer follows. The goal of the service is to cultivate and send out spiritual energy to those in need. You might be sensing a theme here. They do visualization, chant mantras, use mudras, which are like different like hand poses. That's like the way the service is conducted. And then they also have the Sunday Divine services, which are similar to a church service. So again, visualization, prayer, mantras, mudras, all used here to cultivate spiritual energy to heal the world. But at these services, there's also like an address by a spiritual leader of the society. So kind of like a sermon. And then there is a recording of King himself shared, like one of his recordings of one of the 12 blessings. So there's recordings of him channeling Jesus, sharing these blessings. So the Aetherius Society believes that since Jesus was speaking through King, these recordings are literally recordings of Jesus's voice. So it's very, very powerful for them.
And these recordings are like kind of like you played one of King's recordings at the top of the show, right?
Yes, that was a video recording. So the audio recordings have a slightly better quality, but are still, they're recorded in the 50s.
Okay, so that wasn't necessarily like him channeling Jesus. That was just him.
That was just him talking. That was just him sharing the experience of like, here's what happened when Aetherius first started channeling through me.
I see.
The Aetherius Society also believes in and provides hands-on spiritual healing, yoga practices, dowsing, and more. Like they have a lot of different like New Age adjacent spiritual beliefs. There's also something called King Yoga, which is a specific yoga technique developed by George King to help advance the process of spiritual evolution. So it's, again, that like cultivating Kundalini, it's that meditation, like these are very powerful practices for the group. And kind of above all, the group believes in service to others. Like that concept is revisited time and time again. Selfless service to others, helping others, serving others. And the Aetherius Society believes that the best way to be in service to others is by cultivating and sending out your highest spiritual energy. So they're not, I don't want to say they're not saying like, help an old lady across the street, donate to charity. They're not saying that, but what they are saying is that we believe service is God. We think the best way to serve others is to cultivate the highest spiritual energy that we can and send it out to where it is needed.
Okay, so service to them is less like individual acts and more about the like, charging the spiritual battery and doing things like that.
That's what it seems to me. I don't want to say that they're not encouraging like more traditional forms of service. Maybe they are, but definitely the spiritual energy thing is kind of like the be all end all.
Got it.
So that's the overview.
Wow, thanks for that short little...
I know it's a lot, and it really only scratches the surface of what the Aetherius Society believes. Like, again, they have dozens of books, hundreds of recordings, like interviews and podcast episodes, like everything explaining the intricacies of their profound beliefs. Do you have any questions?
I wouldn't even know where to begin. I think you answered a lot of questions I did have, like, where did George King get his start? And then like some of the specifics behind their beliefs and, which planets different masters are from. Like, yeah, I feel like you hit the basic pillars, but like from here, I don't even know what to ask, I guess.
Yeah, it's a lot. And it's very similar in some ways to things like Christianity. Like you have like the spiritual warfare and you have like, you have that stuff, but you also have things that are totally unique to Aetherius Society, like Satellite Number 3 and Aetherius himself and Mars Sector 6. And then you have things that are like very traditionally in Theosophy and New Age beliefs, like spiritual healing and the idea of math. Like it's a really interesting blend of existing concepts with a new spin.
Yeah, it definitely feels like a blend. It definitely feels like, like you just were saying, there's elements of Christianity, there's elements of Eastern religions and spirituality, and then they kind of have their own like secret sauce in there too.
Right. And yeah, I want to point out, like, it is a millenarian belief system. Like, they believe in the end days are coming kind of thing. And, I said up top that George King was brought up in a family that believed in theosophy. They were also Protestant. Like, there was also a Protestant family as well. So his...
That's wild.
Yeah, I know. His upbringing was essentially that blend. Like, his upbringing was hearing about, stuff that Protestants believe, like hearing about Jesus and hearing about, the rapture and hearing about judgment and hearing about spiritual warfare. And then also hearing about the Eastern religions and Western esotericism. Like, it's clear to see where he was influenced when he, when the idea for this religion came to him. I know that I'm going against the teachings of the society. The teachings of the society obviously say that this was transmitted to him. But if you want to take a step outside of their belief system, like, it does seem that he took the teachings he was raised with and added the Aetherius stuff to create something new.
Yeah, I like, if you take an anthropological perspective on this, then you can definitely see where some of his upbringing shines through in the beliefs and teachings of the Aetherius Society.
Right. And like I keep saying, like, it's a lot to take in. Like, it definitely feels like something where it's not really enough to read about it. Like, this is something that maybe you have to experience. And so that's what we did.
Oh, did we?
Sorry, listeners. I was sitting on that card for a long time. We actually...
you buried the lead.
I did bury the lead. The headquarters for the Aetherius Society is in Los Angeles. They have different centers all around the world, but they are headquartered here. So Chris and I had the opportunity to go and pay them a visit. So, Chris, do you want to share with our listeners about our experience, putting you on the...
Oh, yeah. Thanks for putting me on the spot. I don't even have time to channel anyone. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's a lot to unpack here too. We visited them twice. The first time we were intending to go to one of their, what is it called? Prayer Power?
I was trying to take you to Operation Prayer Power.
Okay. And that's the one where they charge the battery.
Correct.
The spiritual battery. Unfortunately, they didn't have I think because it was, there were some people out sick. They didn't have enough people to do it. So it was canceled that night. But luckily, like, we went anyway, and we got to meet, I believe it was the pastor?
We met a reverend. All I know is he was referenced as reverend and one of the followers.
And then one of the followers, but I think she seemed like she was either high up or
she worked there,
had been with them for a while or something. She was very knowledgeable. Anyway, bottom line is they talked to us for like a long time. Like, they talked to us at length.
Hold on. Before you get to them talking to us, can you describe physically what the place looked like?
Oh, it's cool. It was like Disneyland. It was cool as hell. It was like, if you were to picture like a UFO, like, cult compound, but like pretty, this was it. Like, it was, so it's in Hollywood.
It's in like a suburb. It's in like a Hollywood suburb. Like, it's not on a main street. It's like you go into a neighborhood and then all of a sudden it's like, oh, there's hedges with gates.
Yeah, and the gates are like these like metal, beautiful metal work with like little stars kind of punched out so that like light from behind the gate shines through these metal gates and looks like almost like a star field, but like a stylized star field. So it's like, already that's beautiful. And so you walk through these gates, which like feels like sort of significant because of their art. And then you get in and like, it's just, I don't know, they have really pretty grounds. It's kept very nicely.
There was like fountains.
And there's this one fountain that's like, I don't know how to describe it. It's like really like high production value fountain. It's got like an orb, like a glass orb or something. And like the water comes out of that, but then it's like, it's backlit with like, pink and blue light. And then there's like there's like words engraved, like there's some of their, I think, beliefs or something engraved around the side of the fountain. So anyway, it's very pretty and very, it does have that sense of like cosmologicalness to it because of like the stars and the orbs and stuff like that.
I mean, we just sat at the grounds for like 15, 20 minutes just kind of waiting, and it was very peaceful. I mean, this was like at 8 o'clock at night on a Thursday, so it was cold and quiet, and it just was like a nice place. And it seemed like there was maybe like living spaces there. Like it kind of took up like half a city block, I would say.
Yeah, we have some pictures, which if we find it ethical enough, we'll share on Instagram. But yeah, it was just, it was peaceful. I actually didn't, I'm sitting here saying, oh yeah, if you pictured a UFO cult, like it would be like this. But I actually didn't pick up on that until they actually invited us inside after we had talked with them for a little while.
We talked with one of the
beliefs.
One of the followers came up to us and was like, hi. And we were like, hi, we're here for the thing. And she was like, oh, it's not happening. But, then she just spoke to us about her beliefs. And it was there was a lot of focus on Jesus. Like, it felt like we were you had no idea what we were doing. I knew what we were doing. So it kind of felt like we were at just maybe some sort of, Christian event. And then,
like an outsider Christian type thing.
Then the Reverend walked up and, was introduced to us as well and invited us inside. And we walked in. And as we're walking in, you look up. What did you see?
I looked up and I see what I now know is satellite number 3. Like a little, well, it's not diorama, but like a
sculpture.
Model.
Yeah, like a model.
Like a model of this satellite with some of their like sayings, mantras. I'm not sure what, but again, like engraving type stuff around it. And I was looking at it, I'm like, what's this? And then like, that's when the Reverend started explaining some of the UFO stuff. And I was like, oh, and then it's kind of like all came together for me.
And we got to see, we were brought into their church. So we got to see the church, and there was different pictures. Like there was portraits. So there was Lord Babaji, there was Jesus, there was Buddha. There were also portraits of like the galaxy, the sun, the earth. Yeah. There was obviously portraits of George King. It looked very, like if you took some of these, more esoteric posters off the wall, it just looked like any kind of like church that was probably built in the 70s, like in a small room with like an altar. There was a cross and like a table, like an offering table and those kinds of things. But it just, you look 3 inches to the side and it's like, oh, there's a weird altar, a quote unquote weird altar to like the 6 adepts. And there's this guy named George King. And like you take some things out, it looks like any other church. You add some things in, it looks exactly like what like a stereotypical cult depiction would be on like a TV show.
Yeah, it even had like that like cult magenta color to it. You know what I mean? It has like, like the interior was painted. I mean, it was very beautiful, don't get me wrong. But it had that sort of vibe to it for sure. And it also is very much, I'll say this, like an amalgam. I guess that's kind of what you were saying, but it was very much an amalgam of like, if you just look at the altar, you're like, that could almost be Catholic. But then you look to the side and you're like, wait, am I back at SRF? Because I see all these same pictures of these yogis. And then you look to the other side and it's like, oh, there's a Christmas tree that's decorated like a normal Christian Christmas tree. Okay. And then you look just to the side of that and you have, like you said, the pictures of like, some of the cosmological things like the sun and the galaxy and whatnot. So it was just like this very much an amalgam of these different concepts.
There was also a very beautiful piece of art that I wasn't going to talk about until I saw that images of it have been shared by the society itself on the internet. There was a particularly striking piece of art where it was depicting George King coming into contact with, like, I think it was, and I could be describing this incorrectly, but coming into contact with the life force of the planet. So this was kind of like,
I remember that. Yeah.
He had projected down into where like the life force of the planet is held, and the artist's rendering, and this is where he saw like, oh, how small we are compared to like the mighty earth. And the artist's rendering was this tiny, tiny, tiny minuscule silhouette of a man before this grand staircase and enormous doors, and behind the doors are just like flames the size of mountains, and it was
tendrils of light, just sort of like, it
was a very, very striking image. And I think that's a very important image for this religion, because again,
and
it's
also
shared.
If you've played Final Fantasy VII, like, because that's basically the plot.
It was very cool. So that was our first visit.
Yeah.
How about our second visit?
So before I talk about the second visit, I just want to say like how accommodating and nice these folks were.
Yeah.
And as they were explaining stuff, like I definitely got the impression that they cared more about the service than about any one piece of the dogma. Like, in fact, I think the Reverend like explicitly said something to that effect, where it's like, you know, kind of like every religion at the end of the day is kind of about service to your fellow man. Like whether you believe, you know, something specific about Hinduism or Islam, or, you know, aliens in a UFO, like it still kind of comes back to that. So I definitely got that impression from them, that like the base, the fundamental part of their religion that's important at the end of the day is that service aspect.
He shared a quote with us from George King that I don't recall exactly how it went, but essentially boiled down to, if you have a choice between believing in goodness and believing in God, and you can only pick one, go with goodness because it's the same thing. And that has stuck with me.
Right.
Like as something that they very strongly believe in. It was, they spent at least a half an hour with us, like, you know, out of their own time to show us their space and to share with us their beliefs. It was very, and we didn't disclose like, hey, we're here so we can talk about it on our podcast. So they were very accommodating to chat with us, people who just wanted, were there to learn, which is what we were there for.
Yeah. And when we left, we were like, man, they're so nice. Maybe we should join them. I don't know. It's not that bad. So then we decided to go again for one of their services. It was their Sunday service.
The Sunday Divine Services, yeah.
Yeah, because we had missed the prayer power thing. We were like, well, we'd like to see an actual, Aetherius Society in action. So we went to that. As a former Catholic, a current Catholic-ish person.
You were
myself,
raised Catholic.
Raised Catholic. There were some similarities. I mean, like certainly the garments that the guys running the service were wearing.
They were wearing different colored robes, and the robes, I learned later, indicate like kind of your level in the church kind of thing. Yeah,
and those rang a bell to me in terms of like Catholicism kind of has similar, priests wear similar looking robes. And then like the format, right? Like there was sort of like a sermon at the beginning. And then there were they played a lot of recordings of George King channeling Jesus.
Which is really cool. We got to hear Jesus talk.
We got to hear Jesus talk, you guys. So
that's pretty cool.
Yeah. I'm not sure if that's typical or if that's because it's the Christmas season. Like they definitely had a lot of like this particular service was, I don't want to say it was like dedicated to the Christmas season, but kind of. They talked a lot about Christmas.
As far as I know, they do share recordings from George King every Sunday Divine Service. I don't know if they share George King speaking as Jesus every Sunday Divine Service.
Right. And there was definitely some George King that they shared where he specifically went into like, hey, we should try to maintain the Christmas spirit the whole year round, and then we'd all be a lot better off. Right. So maybe they don't play that every single time. That definitely seems like on theme with Christmas. But anyway, yeah, I don't know. They're also like in Catholicism, you might have in Mass, you might have a response from the congregation that's like, singing or maybe some sort of like, prayer response, like, and also with you or something like that. Right. In the Aetherius, they had similar stuff with the Aetherius Society service, except they would do mudras.
So and as part of their service, there are different mantras and mudras used. So we, as people who are not initiated into the society, we were handed like information sheets that said during the times in which we use the mantras and the mudras, please do not try to imitate these. Like you need to be initiated into the society to use these. So please simply sit with your hands in your lap.
By the way, I thought that was so cool that they like had,
they
were like
too.
Ready to go for newcomers. They were like, here's this like this laminated handout that they just handed to us like immediately. I was like, oh shit.
It helped me so much.
Yeah.
We were welcomed to join in the prayer hand gesture, which was just kind of like raising your hands up. You and I chose to sit with our hands on our laps, just kind of like be as respectful as we could be. But yeah, there was usage of specific chants, prayer words, mudras, and I thought it was interesting how specific they were about, please don't engage in this unless you have been initiated into it.
Mm-hmm. Right. Which I probably would have been like too scared to do it anyway. So I kind of appreciated that they were like, just don't do it. It's not respectful. I'm like, done.
My favorite part, though, was that instead of singing like Catholic hymns, because it was a Christmas carol service, we sang Christmas songs.
But they were like, didn't we sing? Like there was, it wasn't like Jingle Bells. It was like Hark the Herald, right?
Yeah, it was like Christian Christmas songs.
Yeah, it was very interesting.
Yeah.
They gave us a handout for the songs they were going to sing too. And there was a part where they, like, one song referenced Son of God, and they crossed that out and wrote, what did they write in place of that? Light of God?
Yeah.
Yeah, I felt like that was pretty interesting.
They don't believe that Jesus is the only Son of God. They essentially believe that, like, everything is the Son of God, because we are all, like, you know, everything goes back to God. So there is no one true Son of God. So that's why they crossed out Son of God and wrote Light of God.
And that's including like you and me, right? Like everyone.
Yes,
right?
everyone. I think maybe everything. Yeah.
Yeah. And like we talked about this before, but just like how syncretizing everything is here in this religion. Like I said the word amalgam before, but hearing the mudras and then like going to like a Christian-y Christmas carol right after that, like really kind of hammered that home, right? Like it was just a really interesting service in that regard.
Right. I think one of my biggest takeaways, though, amongst everything we experienced, amongst like all of the weirdness, you know, seeing the like kind of bizarre looking altar to George King and this like altar to the adepts, and you know the robes that were different than what I was used to, and like, you know, portraits of the planets and portraits of George King seeing the life force of the earth, like all of this very quote unquote like culty atmosphere. And yeah, the chanting and the singing and all of this, my biggest takeaway was that it was essentially like any other church service I ever attended, in that I got bored. I got bored at some points. I got bored. Like, and I don't mean that in like a bad way or an offensive way or this should have been more exciting. I just mean it in the way of like a lot of church is listening to sermon and listening to these lessons and listening to these teachings, which are by nature kind of dry and kind of
well, they're very like, they're almost meditative, right? Like
yeah.
I kind of got the same impression. And even in, again, just to compare it to what I know, Catholicism, like when you're listening to the sermon, you're like, okay, I'm engaged. Like this guy's saying stuff, he's telling a narrative, whatever. I'm pretty engaged. When the mass switches over to, and it's a pretty long section of the mass, it's like most of the mass switches over to the like ritualized process stuff where it's like, you say this, you do this prayer, then you say this, then you sing this song, then you say this. When you get to that part of it, that's when you're like, after a little while, you kind of go like, oh my God, I'm tuning out a little bit.
Right.
And I kind of felt that here, where like at the beginning I was like engaged and everything, and then they kind of switched to this very like, processy, ritualized part of it, and I kind of got a little bit of that same feeling.
Right. It was like we were kind of going into this thing like feeling like, ooh, what crazy thing are we getting into here? And then it was a church service. It was a church service.
Yeah.
It was a church service.
And like at the end of the day, like really not any weirder than like Catholic church. I mean, Catholic
I didn't eat anybody's
right.
body.
Yeah, I didn't literally drink blood, which is what you do in a Catholic church service. So like maybe it's less weird.
Yeah, it's definitely there. It's not weirder, for sure. You are correct. Yeah. And it just, I know I've said it already, but like it was just interesting how this really kind of had all of the trappings of a cult, like all of the signifiers in like ritual and an atmosphere, and then ended up just kind of being like, it's functionally the same thing as a mass. Like it's functionally the same thing as...
Yeah.
Now, I said at the top of the episode, there was something different about the Aetherius Society than other UFO religions. That there's something different about it, something unlike Scientology or Heaven's Gate or Realism. Like there's a twist here. There's a catch. The catch is that the Aetherius Society is uncontroversial.
Whoa.
no controversies, no scandals, no criminal investigations or sex abuse or shady dealings.
Maybe compounds where they improperly imprison people.
They're not disappearing anybody's wives. They're not, there's no boats where people are, losing years off their lives. This is the general consensus among people who study new religious movements and people in the anti-cult movement. Like if you go on Cult Education Institute.
That's the Rick Allen Ross
correct.
Website, right?
And they're kind of like, we've talked about it on the show before, they're a little more hawkish than like you or I would be in terms of like being critical of cult-like groups. And there's really no info about the Aetherius Society there except for this exists.
Yeah. I mean, if something bad exists, if there was something bad out there, I'm pretty certain that CEI would latch onto it and put it on their site.
So how is this possible? Like, they believe in an end of the world rapture archetype, but it's like somehow nice. Like,
before we even talk about like how is this possible, I kind of want to also acknowledge that how I felt. Like when we got into the car after the first meeting, I was going to say to you before you told me all of this, and you told me some of this information that you're telling me right now, that like they're uncontroversial, they're unproblematic. If you hadn't said that, I was about to be like, man, these guys are like really nice. Like they just like gave us a bunch of information. Like they let us look at their church. Like they're very friendly. Like
right.
I hope we can do an okay job with this episode. Like I hope we're not going to like just take a dump on them too much. Like,
right.
Like they're just nice. And then you were like, then you said that and I was like, oh yeah, that totally tracks with how they treated us as strangers coming to their place.
And it's something, I'm going to talk a little bit about specifically their rapture again. And it's something that when we first got there and we were speaking with one of the followers, she explained, she kind of hinted a little bit to this kind of end of the world stuff, but she explained, like, she was very emphatic about it, but nobody is lost. No one and nothing is ever lost. So, she kind of talked about that thing of like, yes, there will be people who evolve and ascend, and there will be people who need to continue their journey elsewhere, but no one is ever lost. And that feels like that just feels different than some of the other rapture type stories in various religions of like, you better believe or else the rapture is going to happen and you're going to be thrown into like a hellfire lake and suffer for all eternity. Like there's just a difference there that makes me feel better in my body.
Totally. There's like, it's absent like the judgment element that is like present in basically everything else. Right.
There's this author, and he's also a professor of religion at Lake Forest. His name's Benjamin Zeller, and he wrote something called Apocalyptic Thought in UFO Religions, and he says, quote, King believed there would not be a catastrophic end to the world, but that the planet was on the verge of a new millennium of peace and enlightenment in the age of Aquarius, end quote. And so the idea is that, like, even if you miss out on an enlightened rapturing at first, you always have the opportunity to eventually get there. You are on this journey, you will get there. It's just
such a
how
positive
slow or
of,
fast. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now,
I like that.
I, as far as we know, and as far as everyone else out there knows, there's not these huge scandals that some other UFO religions and UFO adjacent religions have. Like, again, we've talked about the abuses of Scientology. We've talked about the mass suicide and like alleged brainwashing at Heaven's Gate. As far as we know, this does not exist in this society. There's not these like big, huge, widespread abusive scandals. But I will say, like most other New Age groups, of course there's going to be some snags that like aren't the best, but just are not on the level of bad that like we've seen with some of these groups. Mm-hmm. And so let's talk about those snags just so we're not sitting here fawning, even though I kind of want to fawn. So first of all,
look, nothing. Yeah. If they were completely perfect, then that would be a little sus in its own right.
Right. First of all, it does cost money to be part of this group. So there's, a money aspect. We see that with Scientology, like you have to keep paying money to ascend in the church. You spend $200,000, or like with SRF, a lot of things were kind of like behind a paywall. That's a little bit here. It's definitely
Is it a lot
different.
of money? Because
no.
they, okay, well,
No.
their compound or whatever, I don't know if I want to call it compound, but their property in Hollywood was like pretty big and pretty nice.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how they I don't know how they get the money for it. I really don't. And like, I don't, a lot of followers, and this is coming just from followers, but a lot of followers will say that, George King specifically did not want this to be cost prohibitive, and he specifically, like, did not become rich off of this. He, like, stayed not rich. I don't know if that's true, but,
Big if true.
They talk about on their membership page, which we'll get to in a second, they talk about how they've intentionally wanted this to remain accessible, financially accessible to people. So, they are really big on selling King's books. Like, you actually have to purchase said books in order to begin your spiritual journey with them. So, like, if you want to attend Zoom services, for either Divine Sunday or 12 Blessings, like, they have these in person, but they also have them on Zoom. If you want to attend on Zoom, say you don't live in Los Angeles, you do have to spend about $10 on a book called Realize Your Inner Potential, a Spiritual Handbook for a New Age, because they ask for a password in order to access the Zoom, and the password is the first word on the first page of the index of the book. So you literally have to purchase the book. Oh man,
it's like old school copy protect.
Yeah. I did this, of course. I wanted to, I purchased the book, I read a little bit of it, and I also wanted to join their Facebook group because they do have a Facebook group, and you have to enter this password in order to have access to it. And again, what I found on the Facebook was like pretty uncontroversial, like mostly just people sharing links to like their own guided meditations and like similar prayer events. So that's,
there wasn't like anti-vax propaganda going on.
Not that I saw. And granted, most of my research, the Facebook was very ancillary to my research, but it just seemed kind of nice and normal. Like I got a big, huge welcome when I joined. It was like a huge welcome in the group. It was just, and maybe that sounds like love bombing, and it's very possible. It is, I will say it is very possible that...
Oh, we totally got love bombed.
It is very possible that, like, there's stuff going on under the surface that we just don't know about and hasn't come out yet. I really hope that's not the case. It would be very disappointing if that were the case, because so far the evidence is not there, and they seem so nice that I don't want it to be there.
Right. That would ruin the theme of our season. We're supposed to cap off the theme of the season with a nice cult. Nice. That would ruin the theme.
There's also a membership level, like tier system for the church. So it starts at, you can be what's called a friend of the Aetherius Society, which is not really a membership. It's more just like you give them $10 a year, and that gives you like discounts on attending like special events or on products like books and CDs and like some other perks like that. And then the actual membership is you can either become an associate or a full member, which in addition to a fee does require like different levels of commitment to the organization. So it's like if you become a member, you commit to observing, I think it's either June or July 8th is like their holiest day of the year. And then like 12 or 13 other like holy days of the year. Like you have to observe these. You're expected to attend and participate in services, in Operation Prayer Power, in the pilgrimages, in workshops and seminars. Like you're expected to attend those as much as you can. Full membership requires a higher level of commitment than associate membership, but both cost. You want to guess how much it costs?
You said it was cheap, so yeah. I don't know, $50?
It's $60 a year to be a membership.
Guess.
You do have to apply for membership. And then if you are accepted and initiated in, this is the coolest perk for full members. You are promised to be met by a higher echelon of spiritual entities upon your death who will aid in your transition.
Oh,
not
wow.
bad.
That seems pretty good, yeah.
Seems worth spending $60 a year on.
Yeah, that's less than Netflix.
The second less great thing is that a lot of the mythology behind George King is probably false. We obviously can't verify if he was actually talking to aliens. Like that's something that is unverifiable and is something that is almost certainly false. But we can cross-check his various titles and accolades. So we talked a lot about his different titles up at the top. And like we said, he went by Sir and he had, touted that he had the knighthood. But then you learn that the knighthood was not from the British royalty, which kind of like you think it would be because he's a British guy, but it's actually from like an obscure exiled Byzantine family. Mm-hmm. British sociologist David V. Barrett reported that most of King's titles and degrees were not recognized by mainstream bodies. His doctorate came from the International Theological Seminary of California, which is unaccredited and considered to be a diploma mill. And George King touted being presented with, quote, letter patent of armorial bearings, also known as a grant of arms by Blue Mantle Pursuivant, a herald of Her Majesty's College of Arms in England. Sounds pretty cool.
Mm-hmm. Yep, a lot of names again.
Turns out a grant of arms is something that is applied for, so you're not presented with it, you apply for it, and essentially almost anyone can get it. Like, kind of, it's not as fancy as it sounds.
There's a lot of lab coding going on here in that sense. Yeah.
He claimed to be a police chaplain, like we said, a chaplain for the American Federation of Police, but it was actually for the American Federation of Police and Concerned Citizens, which is basically a group that gives out memberships for $45, has a 0 rating on Charity Navigator, is essentially a scam, and does not have any official chaplains. And if you're not convinced already, from Wikipedia, quote, according to skeptic James Randi, George King's titles of Reverend, Doctor, and Sir are unverified.
Well, since James Randi is our George King,
yeah,
he's towards the center of my trust network.
And like scholars and academics who've done any research on this have said that like probably a lot of this like mythology and these titles were either consciously or subconsciously like ways for the society to legitimize their religion by like legitimizing George King and making him seem very important.
Of course.
And that's something that we see in a lot of, New Age religions. And I understand the intent there, but, obfuscating or falsifying, not really cool. Especially when it's like the dude's talking to aliens. Like, that's enough, man.
Yeah, but I get the like... if you want to broaden the appeal, though, right, then it behooves you to have like all of this other sort of like mainstream legitimization, right. So, I wasn't like super convinced that he had all this stuff when you were telling me. So like this isn't like what crazy. Sure. I guess I definitely feel like the group definitely reveres him quite a bit. Like his voice is, first and foremost in their Sunday service, like his voice was all over the place. His portrait and his sayings are all over their compound. Like he is the charismatic leader if we want to get into the criteria. Right. I can't sit here and say that I can't honestly say that I truly believe that he did the things that he did. Like, anybody listening to the show would know that I'm a skeptic, would know that you're a skeptic. If somebody from the Aetherius Society is listening, I think it would be disrespectful to you if I sat here and, said like, oh, maybe, I don't know. I don't think any of those things truly happened. So, again, not a surprise that you're saying these things about like, he didn't have some of these titles and whatnot. But to the extent that the group is, again, unproblematic and service-oriented at its core, do some of these things matter? Like, I don't know. Like, yes and no. I think where they do matter, I think where the risk is like anytime you have something like this, it's a powerful tool. And it's kind of like we were talking about last week with EMDR, right? That style of brain processing or whatever that, trained psychologists can use. That's a powerful tool. And so some people use it for ill. Scientology uses it for ill. Next Team uses it for ill. I think that also applies to some of the things that, that a religion has, that an Aetherius Society would have, right? These rituals, these chants, the charismatic leader, all that stuff. That's all tools that could be used for ill. It doesn't seem like they are using it for ill, which I think is sort of like the theme of this episode, right? Like it's like a cool cult, right? But it could be, right? It's like there's always like the risk for that. So that's the only call out I would make about like is there something potentially bad here? Right. I don't think there's something bad now. I think that there are tools that could be used. Right. It's like those things aren't awesome, but like the group as a whole is uncontroversial. Like that's just how it be. Like they just seem to mostly keep to themselves while being very open and welcoming to visitors and explorers. They just want to
like share this message of service and goodness. They don't try to convince people to kill themselves. And it was kind of shocking to learn this. I didn't know that UFO religions could be unproblematic in this way.
Yeah, when you describe all of those trappings, when you describe all of those tools, your brain is like, oh man, what kind of crazy shit do they do? And so it is shocking to like be like, oh, nothing actually. They're just pretty chill.
They sit and listen to recordings and do and do some prayers.
And to answer your question from before, well, why? Like, why these? How were they able to do that? I'm not sure, but like, I think that it has something to do with I think it's a bit of like a recipe. I think one element is their openness, right? They don't seem to be secretive. They don't seem to be hiding anything. People can come in and take a look. They're happy to talk to you. Like there's the openness kind of like is just like a natural, disinfectant for that kind of stuff. I think their focus, their fundamental focus on service, I think is another thing. Like, if you're putting the service ahead of the dogma, which it seems like they do, then I think that's another big preventative for like, the kind of nefarious stuff that these cults can get into. And I think I forget what the third thing was that I was going to say. So,
well, I have a third thing.
Those two. Oh, good. Thank you.
And it's not as objective as what you've just said, but I think something that I think feels different is I come away from this believing that George King and his followers believe in this, that this is an actual faith that they have and isn't a scam or a grift or a tool to amass power. I do think that, and this is just the vibes that I'm getting, could be wrong. Maybe it is something that makes it slightly different. I feel like George King believed that he was channeling and believed that he really was here to spread this message of service and goodness, and his followers believe a very similar thing. And granted, I'm sure Scientologists believe in Scientology and still manage to like be abusive, but I think that the true belief in the message, I think that that's maybe part of it. If that's
I thought of my third thing too.
Oh, okay, so it's the fourth thing now.
So that's the fourth thing. Just the content of their message is generally pretty positive, right? The actual content of their beliefs, like you said, they have this millenarian thing going on, but it's like fundamentally non-judgmental, right? It's fundamentally about like, we'll all get there, just keep trying, like versus, well, some people are going to get raptured and the other people are going to hell. Like, because their beliefs themselves seem to be this like non-judgmental, positive, like we're all going to get there, optimistic message. I think that also factors in.
Right. That makes sense.
So they a cult?
Yeah, that's we know that they're weird. We know they're unproblematic.
Definitely weird.
We need to go through our criteria.
If any of you guys are listening, weird is good on this show.
Weird is good on this show. It's cult or just awesome is basically what it is. Cult or just great. Weird is good, but we need to determine if they are a cult or just weird. Yeah,
we got to do the shtick. Let's do it.
Our first one is charismatic leader.
Yes.
Is the leader King or is the leader Aetherius?
Oh, it's definitely King. Yeah. Like I think Aetherius is like the Trump and QAnon, right? But like the charismatic leader is actually Q, right? That's like the object of worship versus the actual leader.
Gotcha.
So
high.
I'm gonna say yes, it's very high. Like we've talked about this on this episode. He's everywhere. Like they talk about him a lot. You're supposed to buy his book.
They think he's an avatar. His portrait's in the church.
Now I don't know. Like I can't say too much of like whether he's charismatic or not. Like, if we're talking about specifically like, oh man, does he like does he inspire me to go out and join or do things? From the recordings, I don't know, not really. He kind of had like an Alan Watts sort of like vibe going to him, but I didn't feel like there was like a lot of like high energy charisma. I think it's mostly in the message. A lot of the followers
do find his style of speaking very charismatic, or at least it's what they say. Like there's a lot of like testimony of, I heard the recordings and I was blown away. I heard the recordings and everything rang true. I heard the recordings and I knew this was the answer. And maybe that's a little bit of like, maybe there's something performative there, because I agree that he was more Alan Watts than like, somebody hyping you up before watching a live tape sitcom. But yeah.
But you don't have to be a high energy, though. Like, you don't have to be high energy to be charismatic, to be influential to somebody's eardrums. Like, Alan Watts, I'm sure, like, most people that are Alan Watts fans would be like, oh my God, he's so charismatic.
Right. So, by a loose definition, yeah, absolutely. There's definitely a leader who charismatic a lot of people into following him.
For sure.
High. Expected harm.
I think that this is low with, like, careful the tools are there.
Right. Yes, it's absolutely low. I think that something that I have a little bit of worry about this group is that it would be very easy for somebody who is a member, like, of the higher ups to amass power and, like, turn it into their own, like, cult. Like, if somebody stepped in and was like, and now I am channeling George King, and, like, it could become that. It has the potential.
That's what I mean by the tools are there, right? Like, if somebody became in charge that had less noble goals than just like, hey, like, everybody do service and we're going to be open. If instead they had different goals, the tools are there for them to exploit and manipulate people.
I think still the expected harm is low, though.
Yeah.
Presence of ritual.
High. Very high.
Extremely high. High. One of the highest.
I feel like we say that a lot. Like, the presence of ritual is so high on this. I feel like of all the criteria, like, that's the one that gets you in the door for us. You know?
Yeah. If there's ritual, but I mean, especially for this, it's like this is very, like, classic ritual. Like, this is like we go to church and we say mantras and we do mudras and we light a candle and we listen to these recordings. We do the prayer power. Like, it's very ritualistic in that way.
Right. Super high.
Niche within society.
Oh, yeah, very niche.
Yeah, extraordinarily niche. Maybe, I mean, a few thousand followers, maybe?
Yeah, this is why, like, the niche criteria is why we're going to call it a cult instead of a religion.
Right.
Because otherwise it feels like, from participating, totally feels like a religion.
Just going to church on a Sunday.
Yeah.
Anti-factuality.
Well, I mean, I don't think the things that they said happened.
I agree. Is that all it takes to be anti-factual, or is anti-factual like being anti-vax?
Yeah.
Like, is anti-factual just believing in weird stuff, or is anti-factual being like, and the real stuff is a lie?
Well, the real stuff is a lie. That falls under dogma for me.
Okay.
But there's still kind of like, we still jam a couple different things into the anti-factual discussion usually. One is like usage of like logical fallacies and, you know, logical closed loops. You know, like if somebody disagrees with us, it's because they're part of the, you know, cabal or whatever.
Right.
I don't think there's too much of that aside from the like being disingenuous about George King's credentials. Right. That to me falls under the like, you know, process red flag. In terms of like the content red flag, I don't know if that's enough. Like, I definitely think the content in terms of like, this person is from Mars and this one's from Venus. I don't think that's true.
Right.
I don't know if that's, I feel like it's more important to not be disingenuous than it is to like have beliefs that are not true. Cause like, I don't think that it's true that you drink blood at church either. So, you know.
Sure. So what are we saying? Medium? Medium.
Yeah. Maybe low. Medium to, medium.
Life consumption, percentage of life consumed. I do get the sense, just given, I do get the sense that like if you're in this, you're like in it. Like,
okay.
That I think people might live there. I think people like, I mean, if you're committed to like, you know, observing all of these different holidays and going to all of these different events and like, you know, I know.
They don't charge you that much money.
They don't, but it's not about the money. It's the percentage of your life that's consumed.
Right.
So like the gentleman that we met, the reverend that we met, he began his spiritual journey in this organization with George King, and he was essentially George King's like one of his assistants, like 24/7 kind of thing. I get the sense that like if you are in this, like you are really, really in it.
Okay, so maybe this is high then. I I think if it was the type of thing where like we could talk to some people there and they're like, oh yeah, we just, have normal everyday lives and then we go to church on Sunday, then I'd be like, okay, well that's not very high. But if people are like living in the compound and like, I don't know. I'll take your word for it on this one.
I'm going to say it's at least medium.
Okay.
Medium to high. Dogmatic beliefs.
Yeah, this is where I think you were saying before, like it doesn't seem that high. Like, in fact, it seems pretty low. Like this is very, like some of the other things, like SRF that we've talked about on the show, seems very syncretizing, right? It seems like, yeah, everybody is the same thing, and it's all like that's why we're correct, is because everybody is part of us.
Right.
So it's like it's kind of sort of like anti-dogmatic in a weird way.
Right. Chain of victims.
Did you feel like you were being recruited?
I did not feel like I was being recruited. I do know that people, this is the kind of thing that's been around long enough that people get born into it. And, when we were there were kids at the event that we were at the services that we were at. But it doesn't feel recruity in that MLM way, or it doesn't feel recruity in that way. I don't know. I think I kind of like need more info. Yeah.
It's also hard because, like, if we're saying it's not harmful, then it's not really
what's
victims.
A victim,
like,
right?
should this criteria actually be like chain of
recruiting
or something? Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
Like so where it came up was talking about MLMs and also talking about QAnon, how like, once you become ensconced in all of this like conspiracy theory, you tend to tell people like, you should look into this and do your own research.
Right.
So by those standards, I didn't feel any of the like, I didn't feel pressured to join or to even to like learn more. It just felt like they were being open and friendly.
So we're going to say low.
Yeah.
And then finally our last one, safe or unsafe exit.
I don't know. We walked out there pretty safely.
I mean, we weren't members. I don't know if there's like an excommunication process. I do kind of get the sense that like there's probably they probably deal with a lot of people coming in, joining for a time and then moving on. They probably have a lot of that.
Right.
I probably need more information on this, but my gut says it's probably safe to exit. I don't think you're going to... I just didn't get the vibe of like you're going to be excommunicated here.
Yeah, I didn't get that vibe either. But
maybe they're just hiding it really well.
Yeah, I mean, to really know, we would have to ask ex-members, right?
So it was high in charismatic leader, high in presence of ritual, high with niche, and then essentially low for the rest, right?
Yeah, so is it just weird?
I think it...
Well, it was medium anti-factuality.
Okay. I think it might be just weird.
It looks so culty though.
It looks like a cult. Like it has all of those like signifiers.
Like it's got like the symbols and the robes.
I mean,
it could
be a beneficial cult, which we've talked about on the show before, or it could just be just weird, and the fact that it is like, not that it's not evil, it's not like nefarious.
Yeah,
saves it from being a cult.
I feel like we bucket beneficial cults into just weirds, right? Like I feel like we tend to do that based on how the criteria works, or
but we have
lack of it working.
Deemed things nice cults. So is this a nice cult or is it just weird? I kind of feel like it's a nice cult. You think it's a nice cult? I kind of think it's not, just because of actually I don't know. I think it's a nice cult. I think it's been
really 4 seasons, guys, and we don't know how to do this.
I think it's really hard to look at something like this and go, that's not a cult, just because it has all of those signifiers and tropes. Like when lay people talk about, oh, it's a cult, like they're talking about this, you know what I mean? Like they're talking about
they're talking about like it has all of the like non-bad stuff, right? Like it doesn't have like the unsafe exit and the dogma and the whatever, but it does have charismatic leader, and it is very ritualistic, and they do have, unorthodox beliefs. So
aliens.
Yeah, let's call it a nice cult.
It's a
beneficial
nice cult. So this is our last episode for season 4, and we were really excited that we were able to go out and actually physically experience this particular group. Like being able to observe a service and interact with the followers, it really did give us a much deeper insight than just reading about it. So we're we've been thinking about, season 5 is coming up. It'll be sometime next year, what we want to do for that. And we're thinking that that's actually something we'd like to do more of. We've visited groups before. We've done it here. We've done it with Best Friends Animal Society, with the Loving Hut Restaurant, Self-Realization Fellowship. But we want to do more and kind of focus more on those experiential things. Like, we're lucky enough to live in a place that is chock full of cults and just weirds.
Full of cults.
So
full to the brim of cults.
We hope that we can bring that twist to you in season 5. That's our goal. That's our goal right now.
Yeah, season 4's theme was, bringing sort of like more positive, more beneficial stories. I think we did an okay job at that, and so we wanted to kind of continue with the idea of like slightly theming things, and so that's what we decided for season 5. Let us know what you guys think.
Did you want to talk about any of the ethics that we talked about while we were making this episode that we're probably going to be grappling with in season 5?
Yeah, we will be grappling with that a lot. I mean, we had a long discussion in the car on the way to the Sunday server the second time we went about like, is this even ethical for us to do at all? And I still don't think that we have like a really definitive answer. I think we answered it for ourselves enough that we were willing to still go to this service and do this episode. And I think that was the right call because it was a very interesting experience. I think what it comes down to, the only thing that I think is possibly unethical here is being there under circumstances that are, that we're trying to like hide. Like, oh, we're not actually interested in joining your church. We're actually just going to be doing this for a podcast, but we're not telling you that we're podcasters. So that part felt disingenuous to me, potentially. I think the reason we felt like it was okay in this circumstance is because like we didn't announce what we were there about either way. Like we weren't, and maybe that's like a little sus, I don't know, but it's not like we were saying like, hello, I am interested in your cult. Please let me know. Like, it wasn't that. Like, we weren't saying one way or the other. We were just like literally the first time we were there, it was just, hey, this is a public thing. You can come watch this stuff. Anybody in the public can come watch this stuff. And so we're like, let's go watch this stuff. And then it just so happened that we met these people. And so then I think that's kind of what created this sense of like ethical dilemma is like,
right.
Well, should that have come up in conversation with them? Or because it didn't really come up. I don't know. But anyway, we ended up deciding that in this case, it was okay for us to attend a service that is open to the public and that we had not been specifically deceitful to individual people about what we were doing.
So we'll see how that continues to shake out as we do more going to places and seeing things.
Yeah, it's tough, right? Like, it's because we're not...
I'm grappling. Yeah, we're not journalists. We don't know. We're not professionals. We're just having a podcast. And I think the question that I also grapple with, like, yes, I want to be authentic, and I do not want to be deceitful. And also, there's a version of this where we reached out to them ahead of time and said, hey, we're doing this show. Can we talk to somebody there? Can somebody show us around? Can we attend a service? The issue that I see with that, while it is more upfront, it also runs into the possibility of like, will we receive a different experience than a regular person going in might receive? Right. So
yeah.
We'll have to figure out how to grab. It'll probably just be as a case by case basis. We'll see. Right.
There's less spontaneity, maybe less, upfront authenticity. If there's like, okay, well, this is a journalist, this is a podcaster. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, if you guys have any opinion on that, let us know what you think, our listeners. Feel free to shoot us an email, cultists&gt@gmail.com, or, ping us on Twitter and participate in that debate. Cause like, we may not be right about this. We may have done something unethical with this episode, but, I'm curious as to what you guys think too.
So that's a wrap on season 4 of Culture Just Weird. We wanted to approach this season with our mental health in mind, and I think we succeeded at not falling down a dark pit of despair. I hope our listeners had a similar experience. And it turns out that it's possible to engage in the weird and the woo without traveling to the dark side. The Aetherius Society was kind of the perfect encapsulation of that idea. A group that has all the trappings of a cult, all the tools, like you said, of becoming something nefarious, but turns out to just be a kind of nice, unassuming, just weird, or nice cult, I guess is what we said. And if somewhere down the line a scandal does come out about this group, like we said, we'll be really sad and we'll be disappointed. But in the meantime, we're just going to enjoy it. This is Kayla.
And this is Chris.
And this has been season 4 of Cult. Or we know how to do a podcast. Go.
Cult or just weird.